Hey guys, in today's video I want to talk about NFTs a little bit and answer a question that I know I was wondering a little bit myself, and the best way to expand my own knowledge of these topics is to research them and share them. And that question in this case is, are NFTs bad for the environment given the amount of power usage that they require? Rather than just give the shorthand answer, which is yes and no, depending on how you want to look at it, let's dig into a little detail. Here's what I found. Davish Montani, an NFT specialist at Century Financial, says that the computational requirements for NFTs are notably higher due to various stages involved, including minting, bidding, and selling, as well as commenting that the typical energy cost of simply minting an NFT on Ethereum is 332 kilowatt hours. Now, to really let that take meaning, we need to dig in a little bit to how big of a power requirement is 332 kilowatt hours. So let's take a look at that. According to smarterhouse.org, where they give some useful measurements about some stuff, every kilowatt hour of energy expended releases a pound of carbon dioxide into the environment. Carbon dioxide, of course, is the leading contributor to global warming and creates significant carbon footprint, hence the name. Now that's of course only looking at CO2 usage, and depending on what types of power production are being used in any given area, those kilowatt hours could mean burning fuels like coal or oil, both of which throw other toxic chemicals into the air. Excessive pollution from coal plants has been positively linked to lung conditions like bronchitis and asthma, heart attacks, and arrhythmia, and even in some cases, strokes. That's not meant as an argument against NFT technology at all, but we do need to kind of draw some comparisons next for context. What other things are kind of an equivalent in terms of power draw of that minting process? I went to the EPA's website because they have a handy tool where you can input various forms of energy usage and it will give you equivalents for other activities. That is perfect for what we're trying to do here. And so with that tool, and the link is in the description, we can put in 332 kilowatt hours, and it gives us a great list of different types of things that are recognizable in life that use a similar amount of power for some context. In this case, a couple of them that I found on that list that seemed worth sharing. 332 kilowatt hours of energy is equivalent to driving 591 miles in a typical car. It burns, in that case, on average, roughly 26.5 gallons of gas consumed by the average car. It's also equivalent to the energy released by burning 260 pounds of coal, or those propane canisters that we use for home barbecues. It's the equivalent energy of 9.6 of those. Or, since we often talk about tech, let's think of it in terms of charging up our smartphone. It's the equivalent of charging 28,620 smartphones. For a single NFT minting, and that's not even considering each time one is traded thereafter, these seem like pretty significant figures considering how often new NFTs are coming to be. So through that context, yeah, it definitely seems like this is a pretty energy expensive process. And that's, of course, just the number we were given for what it costs energy-wise to mint a new NFT, not even what it costs from there to trade them, sell them, etc. But to really think big picture on this, since that's only looking at them kind of one at a time, in a larger sense, how much activity on the blockchain period does NFT activity currently constitute? The founder of the Blockchain for Climate Foundation, Joseph Pallant, says that NFTs comprise a small enough amount of total Ethereum transactions currently that it would be kind of like comparing your own share of energy usage from a commercial plane flight against the entirety of all plane flights. In that context, your own usage seems small enough to dismiss. Several other sources currently estimate that NFT transactions make up only about 1% of the total Ethereum network. Some have argued that's pretty negligible and we shouldn't even worry about it. But I guess part of it, we could also look at it as the question of who is creating the NFTs. For instance, when a celebrity artist creates art in the form of an NFT, it can have a much greater carbon impact because of the large number of transfers. One example, when the musician known as Grimes released her open edition of the Bitcoin Angel, it resulted in 468 tons of carbon released for all of the transfers right on release point that elicited. A link to that source in the description. So I guess at this point, you're probably wondering, why is the blockchain so energy inefficient and why can't we make it more efficient? From what I've read, In a simplified way, we can think of the blockchain as one massive digital database that functions kind of like a ledger. But unlike typical databases, the whole idea of the blockchain is to be, as they call, immutable or not editable. This is the reason the blockchain, some say, is so trustworthy as a ledger, because every transaction has a public log of having happened, and everyone accessing the ledger can view it. No one can change it. Typical databases do not store entry logs like this because of how quickly it would bloat the system. Those databases are designed to be read and changed as quickly as possible, which inevitably means leaving out any data developers can stand to lose. For the blockchain, that kind of energy requirement functions kind of as a security measure. For instance, for anyone to be able to hijack the data going in or out of a given blockchain, they would have to control 51% of the total computing power going on to make that happen. And given just how much power that would ultimately mean, that's unlikely. Another thing that we should look at, just to be fair, for context, when we're looking at some of those numbers that we were talking about a minute ago that seem pretty large, is since a lot of people are viewing cryptocurrency as maybe the future of money and maybe something that could supplant or replace our current financial setup, we'd have to really be able to compare how energy expensive it is to run our current money system if we were really going to make any definitive statements about Ethereum or any other cryptocurrency being bad. This is a tough one to explore, primarily because we'd never be able to produce consistent numbers for those things. We've probably just never felt a need as a society to do so, and there's also so many moving or obscured parts that pointing at a specific number is probably not viable. It's easy to look at NFT and badmouth it because it seems so expensive to produce and trade. However, we have to ask some questions like, what is the cost of mining gold, all things considered, such as plotting and finding where the gold even is, paying people to do that, the vehicles involved, the equipment, the salaries of everybody that has to go out there and mine it, environmental impacts. What is the cost of operation for traditional banking institutions, even specific types of transactions like ACH drafts? And the banking institutions would go down into salaries for everyone that works there, everybody that has to drive to a branch each day to work, pollution effects of their cars, the fuel that it takes them to do that, the amount of electricity and internet and whatnot it takes to run those branches and do everything that they do, the lights, the power, all of that. What is the average cost of all debit card transactions in any given country? Have no idea. I tried to do some digging into that, but that's just a really tricky one to end up getting enough different data points to start drawing some conclusions. If I can come upon something a little bit more definitive, I'll share in a future video. One last thing that we'd want to think about with our current finance system is how much does printing money cost every year, and what are the environmental effects of doing that? The big printing press is owned by the federal government, minting coins, etc. What are the effects of those? I'll do some further digging and get back with you on that. But I mention all of this even when I don't have specific numbers because I think it's good for context to say, if we're not sure, I mean, the answer is probably a hell of a lot to these things, but if we're not sure what exactly the amount or the number is to that, then it's really hard to compare it against Ethereum and say, this looks really inefficient, it's clearly bad. What if the numbers that we saw from traditional finance were equally shocking? Then by comparison, not so scary to start thinking about Ethereum and Bitcoin and all of those others. Some people would argue that our current systems are inefficient as hell, and not just from a human and rules standpoint, and that's what's kind of brought about some of the push for the crypto world to be what it is and for it to be adopted in as many places as it's starting to be. I hope this was interesting for you as a point of discussion and that we at least kind of answered the question. And it's definitely a topic I'd like to revisit going forward in greater detail when I have some different information. Maybe I could even do an interview with somebody who's really knowledgeable in the crypto space who might have some good data on this. And if anyone watching is that person, feel free to get a hold of me through the channel. You just send an email to digimorphosis@outlook.com and let's get in touch and let's have a conversation. Anyway, guys, please like if you found this video interesting and follow me for the next one. Catch you then.